This morning, want to just share with you all our presenters, Dr. Wanda White, Arlena Ratliff from the Golden Leaf Foundation, Lisa Kortoff from GTCC, and we do have a guest this morning, Dr. J.W. Kelly from the System Office. Before I move on to Dr. Kelly for some words of wisdom and advice, I'd like to just go over the announcements, a few announcements this morning, just to remind you about the finish line training session that's going to be held next week on the 27th from 1 to 2. I know that many of you have already gotten reminders from Allison, I'm not going to butcher her last name, Garmin, our point of contact and also finish line grant coordinator. So just keep that in mind. I know that there were lots of questions that you all had that will be answered from last week's finish line grant meeting. Also, just want to remind you about your 21-22 federal Pell Grant and also your Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant Award years. The processing deadline, you all are very much aware of this, is September 30th. So this includes any drawdowns and also return of funds. All of that has to take place on September 30th. And you want to make sure that if you have got any adjustments that you're making that you want included in that September 30 deadline, that you are making those adjustments by 8:00 a.m. on September 30. So again, that's a very important date. I know that there's lots of things going on that date, things that are due. In addition to that is going to be your FISAP. FISAP is due on September 30th. Normally it's October 1st, but October 1st falls on a Saturday. So Friday, September 30th, make sure that you're getting your FISAP done. Another important event that we have coming up, I'm super excited about this, is the Financial Aid Leadership Academy. Lots of retirements, promotions, career changes, and just that overall desire for wanting to learn as much as possible about financial aid. All of the tricks, turns, tips, all of that good stuff about financial aid. We are working on a phenomenal leadership academy. So in a few weeks, you're going to see those dates and also your application to participate and or attend. We're going to continue to have it at GTCC at the Conference and Convention Center that is beautiful and also centrally located for all of our colleges. So be on the lookout for that. Just a quick reminder also about the System Office Conference that's coming up. It's coming up October the 9th through the 11th, and it's going to be held here in Raleigh at the Convention Center. So lots of great sessions, including roundtable discussions, breakout sessions, association meetings. So lots of good information there. Also, for our financial aid administrators, the NACASFA conference is coming up for this fall, excuse me, October 23rd through the 26th, and it's going to be held this year in Concord, North Carolina at the Embassy Suites Golf Resort and Spa. So make your reservations, your hotel reservations by this Thursday, September 22nd. There's also a tentative agenda for this conference as well. So without further ado, and no more announcements on my end, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Kelly, again, for his comments, words of wisdom, and for other community comments today.
Well, I don't know if I have any words of wisdom, Brenda, but I am happy to participate in today's presentation. Am I breaking up a lot? Or no? Okay, thanks, JJ. Appreciate the thumbs up. So really, I wanted to ask Brenda if I could share some words of appreciation, to be honest about it, instead of words of wisdom. I was looking at some of the information over the past 3 years or so, and especially the amount of funds that has flowed through the financial aid offices over the past 3 years. And to be honest, it's just amazing and shocking how much the financial aid community has processed over the past 3 years when it comes to unexpected federal monies, different grants, different programs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I know we're all very, very grateful for the additional monies that we have available to serve our students. And we also know that that comes with a lot of additional reporting, coding, and processing. I think of the FA review team and Brandy Massey and all the work that they've had to do in coming up with the way to track and code and report on all of these different things over the past 3 years. And it's just been a whirlwind of activity and unexpected expectations on the financial aid offices. And so I wanted to take a minute at the beginning of this fall semester and just say thank you. So if you haven't been thanked yet, I hope you will accept this thank you from the student services team here at the system office, because we know how hard you work to serve your students and how everybody, each one of you, has personal expectations of high quality and high accountability to make sure the funds are used well and the funds serve the students and meet those students' needs. So thank you for that work, and thank you for everything you do. Most recently, I wanted to thank you for all the work with Brenda and with Wanda when it comes to the reconciliation efforts and the Golden Leaf monies, which was another kind of unplanned activity that we all needed to go through to make sure that our monies were correctly aligned between the financial aid office and the business office. And so thank you for those extra efforts. And I know that they came at a time that was probably burdensome and maybe even felt a little arduous, and we apologize for that. We were trying to figure out what was going on our end as well. And so again, thank you for your patience and thank you for your professionalism as we work through all of that. One thing that's come to my mind that I think is critical, and I know Brandy Massey and I talked about this, and so has Brenda and I, and is the high need to make sure that our coding is accurate and to make sure that those workflows that the FA review team and Brandy work on so diligently are followed. So I encourage you to please work and follow those to the best of your ability. And then the second is the communication between you and your business office. As you know, that is critical for a successful financial aid office. And so we just encourage you to keep those lines of communication open between yourself and the business office. And I'm probably preaching to the choir. However, I just wanted to take that time to one, give those two highlights of things that I've kind of seen over the past several months, and then also over the past several years, my appreciation for all the hard, dedicated work at each of the financial aid offices and your service to your students. So thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for everything you're doing. And we will do our best to continue to strive to serve you as you serve your students. So Brenda, that's all I wanted to say. And I know you've got a tight agenda, so I'll be quiet there and turn the mic back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. You did provide words of wisdom in addition to the appreciation. So now, without further ado, we're going to move on with our meeting this morning. Going to turn it over to Dr. Wanda White now for some information on Long Leaf Complete Grant. And she, along with Arlena Ratliff from the Golden Leaf Foundation, will provide you with some Golden Leaf Community College Scholarship Program updates for this year. Dr. White?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first financial aid community meeting that we've had this year. I want to thank all of you, in addition to what JW has said, for all of the hard work that you've provided in assisting us with the Golden Leaf Scholars Program this year. But I'm going to begin this morning with the Longleaf Complete Grant. I have a few updates that I'd like to provide to you. I want to remind each of you that June 30th, 2023, we'd love for you to have all of your awards made by that time. The reporting deadline for the Longleaf Complete Grant is September 20th, 2023. In addition to that, we will continue to monitor the Longleaf Complete grants each year, each month. We will look at confirming the number of awards along with the dollar amount of awards that you are making at your institution. We receive updates from our business office here at the system office around the 15th of each month. And during that time, we are provided with the awards that you make at your institution. In addition to that, we are also provided with the number of students. But because oftentimes colleges will provide us with information that is not necessarily always the exact correct amount, sometimes these grants get mixed up with one another. So I always like to confirm with you the number of awards that you make, as well as the dollar amount before I report it to the state budget office each year. So again, colleges are encouraged to make grant awards to eligible students as soon as possible. Next, I want to move the next slide, please. Next, I want to move on to the Golden Leaf program. I'm going to talk this morning about several areas that I'd like to give updates on as it relates to the Golden Leaf Scholars Program. First of all, I'd like to provide to you the status of previous year Golden Leaf Program reviews, also the review of the 21-22 year closeout requirements, which you're going to hear about very soon, and also review updates for the 22-23 eligible Golden Leaf counties that will be coming up very soon that we want to make sure that you're aware of. In addition to that, we're going to talk about monitoring and reallocation of Golden Leaf funds effective January 2023. We'll also mention and talk about the 50% reduction of funds for underuse of the Golden Leaf program. So next slide, please, JJ. Okay, so several areas that, first of all, I want to start with our review of the 2018-2019 year, 2019-2020 year, and the 2020-21 year. During the spring semester of the 2022 year, the system office, as you know, conducted program reviews on the Golden Leaf programs for these 3 years. And these reviews were directed by the Golden Leaf Foundation. Colleges were asked to submit new award directory spreadsheets to correct any necessary errors and ineligible counties, and etc., because there were some other things as well. They were also asked to make corrections and adjustments to award directories and reconcile Golden Leaf awards with their business offices. And it's important that you know that this was just not something that the system office decided to do. This is a request by the Golden Leaf Foundation, and it was important because in order for the Golden Leaf to pay the system office the funds that your college awarded, then they had to make sure that your award directories matched the North Carolina Community College system finance expenditures, which your business office turned over to our system office. And in some cases, these records did not match. So therefore, that is one of the reasons, most important reason why we were conducting this review, to ensure that all of the information was correct before we submitted it to the Golden Leaf Foundation. Uh, so we thank you, those of you who worked hard to get that information back to us. And I will say that there are some colleges whose records matched um, identically to the system office records that were provided by our system office for expenditures. So we thank you too for your efforts in ensuring that your records were reconciled. Uh, we also want to talk about the review of all years complete, the review of all years that are waiting on our review. We currently have the 21-22 year that we're finalizing, and we'll be possibly contacting some colleges very soon, just asking for a few additional information. I do want to say that the 21-22 year looks pretty good at this time, but I want to remind you all that we have sent out. Okay, I do want to remind you that we've sent out the 22-23 information for awarding, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well as we move on to the next slide for the 22-23 year. There are specific things that we want you to pay attention to that have to do with your county, eligible counties, as well as some additional information. So let's first go to the status of the 21-22 year. As I indicated, we're currently reviewing the 21-22 year. You've already submitted spreadsheets to us for that year. We've looked at many of the errors and corrections, but we're also just doing a quick review again to make sure that there's nothing else that need to be changed before we forward it on to the Golden Leaf program. So if we contact you for additional information, we're asking that you please review it quickly and get that information back to us so that we can get everything that we need to get to the Golden Leaf Foundation by September 30th, so that we can request all funding for the 21-2022 year. Colleges, before you send your information back to us, we ask that you review your scholarship awards with your business office to make sure that you have reconciled those records. One of the things that we found out that was happening in the last 3 years is that we had quite a few colleges that had not reconciled your Golden Leaf Awards with your business office. And we want you to approach this as you do your Pell Grant reconciliation, your SEOG reconciliation, your other scholarship and federal aid reconciliations. Whatever you award to students has to match what your business office has recorded on their records. If you make adjustments in the Golden Leaf Awards, then you should also make sure those adjustments have been made on the business side. Because what has happened in the past 3 years, we find that some of the adjustments weren't made on the business office side. So the business office has a specific date that they request from our business office at the system office, saying this is the amount of Golden Leaf Awards that have been awarded by our particular college. And what we do is we match those awards up with what you sent to us on the directory. And what we found in many cases is that they don't match. Either there's been some adjustments made on the financial aid side and the business office hasn't been notated about it, or perhaps they have and the adjustment hasn't been made. So what we're going to be pushing this year is reconcile to make sure that all of your records match. So let's move, JJ, to the 22-23 year. So this year, for the 22-23 year, the system office has been awarded $1,750,000 in Golden Leaf funds. And we are so blessed and we're thankful to the Golden Leaf Foundation for their consideration of our students in the community college system and wanting to provide them another avenue for financing their education. And so we're very pleased about that. We're pleased with you, our colleges, for providing that assistance to our students. We sent out the award notification on August the 19th, 2022 to all of the colleges with your allocations, also with the eligibility guidelines for Golden Leaf. And that information, we want to make sure that you review it. It's very important that you do, because there are some changes in the counties that are now eligible to receive Golden Leaf funding. And these counties will be the counties of eligibility for the next 5 years. So I'm going to just provide you with just a couple of updates in regard to that. There are some new counties that have been added to the Golden Leaf eligible counties list, and that include Cumberland County. It includes Gaston County. It's 2 eligible counties. And we also have some counties that have been removed from the Golden Leaf listing, and that includes Johnston, Brunswick, Pender, Haywood, and Carteret Community College. And I'm not sure if you all have reviewed the listing. Brenda and I were discussing the other day. We said, well, maybe they haven't looked at it because we haven't received any questions. But we do have Arlena Ratliff on the phone with us today. So Arlena, I'm going to pause for a moment to see if you want to provide any feedback relative to the change in eligible counties for Golden Leaf.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to join you all this morning and echo Dr. Kelly and Dr. White's sentiments of gratitude. Thank you all so much for the hard work that you do to ensure that the Golden Leaf Scholarship is available to students. Just want to share a little bit of context for our counties that have come on and off the list. We understand that these changes can be a little difficult to keep up with or to memorize, and so appreciate you all's willingness to be flexible with us. Our board, the Golden Leaf Board, recently did modify the criteria to establish our qualifying counties for the Golden Leaf Scholarships programs. These changes are effective starting this semester, fall 2022. When thinking about our eligible and ineligible counties, the new approach reviewed the economic distress levels measured by the tier system over a 5-year period. And so when we look at counties that have been tier 3 for the majority of 5 years, those counties were removed from our list because we do not consider them as economically distressed. And so our goal, as Dr. White said, is to try to keep these counties the same for the next 5 years. We do anticipate there might be a few shifts as we look at the tier systems, but do not think that those shifts should happen as frequently or as often or as much as they have in the past. And so do want to remind folks on the call that even if you have a community college that is no longer in an eligible county, you can still make awards to students who live in eligible counties. So Dr. White listed the counties that are now ineligible, for example, Brunswick. However, Columbus and Bladen counties are surrounding counties that are still eligible for students to receive the award. And so just wanted to offer a little bit of context, and again, appreciate your flexibility. We do have those lists of counties that are now ineligible and eligible. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
There is a question in the chat box, and basically, I think it's from Brenda Long, and she says, "I have received Golden Leaf funds through, is this SEA, NCSEAS?"
Maybe it's
No, NCSE. The State Education Assistance Authority. I typed it wrong.
Okay. If these funds are coming from the State Education Assistance Authority, then they are separate and different from what we are awarding through the community college system. So we will need to do some research And if you have any information on the criteria in regard to the scholarship that you're awarding, please send it to us and we'll do some research and provide you with a response.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Okay. And before I conclude, again, I want to remind you to look at the eligibility requirements. I think this is so important as you begin your awarding process. Some of you may have already started it for the 22-23 year. Remember that the students must demonstrate need and reside in the qualifying counties. As we reviewed your information and for the program review, that's one of the things that we saw. We were able to identify immediately counties that didn't match, that weren't on the eligible counties. So remember to check them out before you send your directories to us. Also, remember that the students have to have need. Remember that 25% of your award should go to continuing education students, at least 25%. You can award more, but at least make sure that you're awarding 25%. We will provide some training a little bit later on in the semester, probably sometimes next month, for colleges that may be struggling to develop a process. Last year, we were actually able to have a meeting with some of our colleges to identify some of the processes that you may want to use if you don't have one in terms of identifying eligible students. So we can talk about that during the training session. But again, we also want to remind you to do a monthly reconciliation with your business office. I think that's crucial. I think that will ease the process for you as well as for the system office as we review your reports before we send them into the Golden Leaf Foundation. The Golden Leaf Foundation Board does reserve the right to alter the list of eligible counties as well as the policies. So we ask that if you have specific questions that you're going through as you go through the awarding process, to make sure that you contact us or contact me, and I will do everything I can to get the answer to you as quickly as possible. Also, please note that with our monitoring of the program, that we will be looking at colleges as early as January of 2023 to determine whether or not you are spending your money. We encourage that you spend award all of your Golden Leaf money by the end of May so that we can get your reports back in June. Any funds that you award after June 30th will not count for the 2023 year. So just want to make sure that you remember that. We gave colleges the opportunity to opt out of the Golden Leaf program. The opt-out deadline was September the 9th. At this time, we have no colleges that have opted out. So it is our belief that all colleges will be participating in the Golden Leaf program this year. So we're going to, that is the end of my updates for this morning. If there are any questions, then please feel free to contact me. You can email them to me. You can put them in the chat box, and we will definitely be back in touch with you. Thank you.
And Dr. White, I just wanted to add.
Yes, please. Arlena is going to, from Golden Leaf Foundation, is going to provide just a few more updates.
Absolutely. And a really quick update. One of the suggestions that came out of the focus groups that we did last year was to offer a one-pager or a resource about the Golden Leaf Scholarship to assist you all as you are keeping up with all of the things that you keep up with. And so Brenda and Dr. White and myself have come up with just a quick one-pager that goes over eligibility requirements for the Golden Leaf Scholarship, the reporting timeline that Dr. White just discussed, and also there are a couple of resources at the bottom. Thank you, Dr. Evans, for dropping in the chat the Golden Leaf Community College's link to our website. There's also a link to the qualifying counties, which we just discussed, and you can see those counties and keep up with those updates. And the application and guidelines are also linked at the bottom as a resource, as well as a letter from Golden Leaf's president, Scott Hamilton. And so as you're awarding scholarships, if it is a practice of yours to also send a letter from the foundation or the scholarship community for which a student has received awards, that is a resource that we have available in this one pager. And so hopefully that is helpful. If there's something that you don't see here that would be helpful to place in the document, please do let us know.
Thank you, Arlena. I just also want to mention, so that you all have this in your mind, that at the end of each term, the student directory of awards that you have made, we will be requesting those from the system office. And so I would just remind you to make sure, if you update them on a monthly basis, just check them to make sure all of the awards are included. Then they're going to match the business office, but also reconcile with your business office. That's going to be very important. But at the end of each term, so we're looking at the end of fall semester. Is that usually around January?
We'll report.
Yeah, around January 2023, we'll be reporting to Golden Leaf all of the awards that you've made for fall term. And then by the end of the spring semester, or June, July, we'll be reporting what you've awarded in the springtime. So no later than June 30th, you need to make sure that your records are reconciled. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. White, and thank you, Arlena Ratliff from the Golden Leaf Foundation. Before I move on to Lisa Kortoff, I do want to say that we are going to be the Golden Leaf police or patrol this year, because we have been given a charge here at the system office to make sure that the information that we are submitting on behalf of students who are receiving the scholarships, that it is accurate and that it matches with what your business office is requesting for reimbursement from our finance team here at the system office. So we will be patrolling a little bit more. And now, without further ado, I know this is the moment that many of you all have been waiting for, because that FISAP is right around the corner. I'm going to turn it over to our Lisa Kortoff from GTCC, and I say ours because she belongs to not only GTCC, but she is a great help to everyone across all 58, and even keeps us straight here at the system office. Lisa Kortoff.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind, I think. I sound like I'm the police now, but I've just turned on my camera a moment just so I can say hello to those of you I don't know. Again, I'm Lisa Kortoff, Director of Financial Aid at Guilford Tech Community College in Greensboro, and I've been doing FISAPs now for 35 years. So I have 35 years of experience to share with you right now with the FISAP, and with it being due just 10 days away, if you haven't started it, I would plan to start it this afternoon. So, because you do have a little work to do. So I'm going to turn my camera off, and I'll work with my folks there at the system office, and I'll let you know when to change the slide. So I'm ready if you'll change the slide. So for those of you who are new to FISAP, what the FISAP actually stands for is the first three letters are the Fiscal Operations Report, and the AP stands for the application to participate. And what that basically means is that you're going to be reporting for campus-based programs, which is SEOG and Work Study, used to include Perkins, but that's a dying program, for the year that just finished. And you're going to be applying for funds for the upcoming year. So right now, the report due this month is for reporting 21-22, and you're applying for campus-based aid for the 23-24 year. So next slide. Thank you. Before you get started, if you haven't already, be sure to reconcile everything. Make sure your Pell matches your GL. Make sure it matches the feds. SEOG and Workstudy you don't have to match with the feds, but it's a good idea to make sure you match with your general ledger, with the business office. Also be sure that you're avoiding your uncashed checks on a regular basis, because obviously if you don't do that, your numbers may end up being overstated. And of course, that's a decision you have to make at your own institution about how often you will do this. And it's definitely a team effort with your friends in the business office. The other thing that's real important that you do before you get started is that you, while you're balancing your work study, which used to be college work study, which is why you see CWS on here, is that you need to update your CWS earnings field on the AIDE screen for each of your work study students. That number has to be accurate in order to pull the right figures in the grid in the last section. If it's not, then you won't be able to balance, and that would be a bad thing. If you normally allow your payroll department to update that field on a monthly basis when they run payroll, then when you go to the FAAA or FAAP screen, I think if I'm saying that word wrong, but when you go to that screen, you're going to temporarily, if it's not already changed to a Y, you're going to change it to a Y. And what that does is that opens that field on the AIDE screen for your Federal Work Study Award, so that you can manually go in and adjust any of those that have gotten off and don't balance with what they actually received. If you temporarily change to Y, just don't forget when you're done balancing to go change it back to a no on FAAP, so that your monthly posting can happen from the business office. Now, I know some of you don't do that with the business office. That's totally fine. You can get to that field anytime you want, and so go to it. Make sure it matches. Next slide. So, this is a little bit of a group project because there's certain pieces of information on this report that other departments probably keep. For one is your enrollment, the number of students who were enrolled this past year. At my school, it's an institutional research department that has that info. So I send them an email and I ask them to give me that figure. Also, business and for tuition fees, your business office will be able to help you with that figure and tell you how much tuition and fees they've gotten. What I like to do, and if you'll go to the next screen, please, I like to send an email to those departments, and I just copy paste the instructions from the Phys app that tell them how to calculate tuition and fees, how to calculate enrollment, because there are certain definitions of that. So be careful when you're requesting it that you're asking for the right thing, because you really do need these figures to be accurate, obviously. Next screen. So section A, to me, I think is the most important section of the form. And the reason why it's important is because the campus-based allocation of funds that are given to us each year is really an old formula that really benefits schools that have been in the Title IV programs from the very beginning. Those schools had a what's called a base guarantee of funds way back in the 60s. And when they decided to change the formula in the 70s to try to make sure that this money was going to more students who were low income, these schools fought for the right to have that base guarantee, which gives them a guaranteed minimum. And then our reporting on this report figures out how much they get above that base guarantee. But because there's only so much money, those folks with the base guarantee, they always get a nice plump amount of money, and the rest of us get the scraps. So it's really important until our friends finally decide to change this formula that we do accurate reporting to get as much of this money to help low-income students as we possibly can. Next screen. So people laugh at me about this, but I've done it literally, like I say, for 35 years. I always ask for $1 million in work study and $1 million in SEOG. And when folks ask me why I do that, the reason why is you really want to make sure that you maximize the amount that the feds will give you. They will do that calculation beyond your base guarantee. And if you have asked for less than what they show that you qualify for, they will give you exactly what you asked for. So I've seen a lot of schools get a lot less money than what they could have received through their own efforts, through this Phys app. So put a big figure. Maybe you don't put $1 million, that's okay. But if you sat down and figured out, for example, if an SEOG is at a maximum of $4,000, and if you have this many students at your school who file a FAFSA and show some form of financial need, not even enough maybe for a Pell Grant, How much money would that be? Wouldn't it be great to be able to give your students $4,000? So ask for as much as you feel comfortable, but don't limit yourself. And our students can really use this money, obviously, and especially now that they're not going to get any more HERF money. I know our students have been asking where that HERF money is coming this fall, and I have to tell them the bad news, it's gone. You know, keep in mind you have a lot of flexibility. If you do get more funds than you can initially use, you can transfer money between programs. You can transfer up to 25% during a normal year from SEOG to work study and back and forth. And with work study, you can transfer money back and forth as well. We'll talk more about that in the presentation. Also, I know some schools like to prorate their SEOG, but honestly, it's the one program, the one grant program you don't have to prorate if you don't want to. So save yourself some hassle and spend some money if you need to, and consider dropping that requirement unless you're fine with that current requirement, which is totally okay. That's the good news about SEOG. It does give you a little bit of flexibility at your school to do what makes sense for your population. But just know that there's a world of possibilities out there for you. Next screen. So under part 2, section D is question 7. That's an unduplicated head count that you're going to ask your institutional research department or whatever department on your campus might keep that good info for you. Same thing in this section E, question 22, there's those tuition and fee charges that, at least at my school, the business office figures. Keep in mind that those tuition and fee charges should only be for the unduplicated head count in question 7 in section D above. You need to make sure, quiz your business office, make sure they're not throwing a bunch of other fees in there like Con Ed or something like that. That should not be counted in there. And good news, question 24 has been disabled. I was delighted to find that when I started digging into the FAFSA this month. And that's the question that used to ask us about state grants and how much we gave out. And I told you last year when I did this presentation that data was never used anymore since that grant that it was used for went away about 12 years ago. And somehow, maybe they heard me talking and the feds finally decided to shut down that question. So yay. It's just one less thing you have to worry about. Next slide. Well, I told you what the most important section was earlier, your amount at your request, but here's the second most important question, and that's how much campus-based funding is going to be based on the questions in this section of sections E and F. As I mentioned before, beyond that base guarantee, your tuition fee question, the Pell Grant question, because it asks you how much Pell Grants you've dispersed in the past year, and the number of eligible aid applicants you have at your college, all are critical to determining how much you're going to receive. So be really careful with these figures. Next slide. Section F is tricky. It looks simple, but it's tricky. So you need to be careful about what group of students you're putting in here. I have seen over the years, some schools, unfortunately, will just run the EAAP screen, which is what will give you the output to fill out this section. They'll run it wide open. And that will include people who filed a FAFSA with your school, but also maybe didn't enroll either. And you don't want that in your numbers. You only want students who were enrolled. And they would file a FAFSA, a valid FAFSA during the year in question. So please try to use some sort of query, whether that's using SLCR, which I really don't use that much myself, but RLPC, I use that one a lot, or Informer queries, again, I use that one a lot. And that to generate a saved list to use on EAAP. Just don't run it wide open and use the figures from there because they will definitely be wrong. Next slide. And here's just a quick summary of what an eligible aid applicant is. I've taken this right from the instructions, but pulled this into the presentation just so you'd have a handy reference. This is what you need to make sure is in your query results. They had to have at least 1 credit of a Title IV eligible degree seeking academic or training program. Or an approved program listed on your e-card. They must have met the citizen or residency requirements for the award year and have done the FAFSA and gotten an official EFC. So no invalid FAFSAs are included. So those are your eligible aid applicants. So be sure your query is pulling the right group of people before you run EAAP and input your results into your FAFSA. Next slide. In this section, you'll notice under the eligible aid applicants, there's a little breakout that asks for the students who have auto zero EFCs. I'm really curious how this is going to change when we get to the new years where, you know, EFCs go away and there's not really a thing called an auto zero EFC. So stay tuned for that. I'm interested to see what happens. But for our purposes, the numbers in this area are very important because the more you have in this area, the more campus-based funds you qualify for. So there really is an emphasis on this in the calculation. So you need to make sure your figures are accurate here. And just as a reminder, when you're doing verification, which, you know, I know we're not really doing verification right now, but when we go back to doing verification, or even if you just run across a student who maybe filled out their stuff wrong, be sure you're correcting their FAFSA, even if it doesn't change their EFC from a 0, it just stays 0. Because it may change from a 0 without auto 0 EFC to one that is qualified for an auto 0 EFC. And the more of those you have, obviously, the better, like I've already said. So be sure to correct those things if you can, so that you have the best figures possible for your phys app. Next slide. Thank you. Also, be sure to maximize the use of your funding. I know it can be a little daunting when you get here to the end of the year and you've realized you haven't spent all your money. Summer is really a good time to spend your campus-based funds that you may not have utilized during the year. So I like to make sure I'm all nice and balanced at the end of the spring semester and to see how much money I have left in SEOG and work study. Because the feds, God bless them, they give us some flexibility to do some things with that money. In a normal year, you can transfer up to 25% of your SEOG to work study and vice versa. You can also transfer up to 10% of your SEOG to last year or next year. And that says SEOG, that should be work study. I have a typo in there, my apologies. And you can also exceed your 10% transfer limit when expending funds for summer enrollment. What I mean by that is if you have payroll for the month of June and you pay that in July, which, you know, again, still part of summer, right? You can go ahead and count that as part of your regular year disbursements. It doesn't have to be counted as part of your 10% carry forward just because it happens after July 1. So your 10% really is for those periods past July that you would want to pull, you know, send money to the new year and utilize. At least at GTCC, we try to use that money first. And like, for example, we posted our August and our September, August payroll to some leftover funds we had for 21-22 before we changed our budget code for the next payroll period. So there's some flexibility built in that you really should take advantage of. And again, with national emergency, that's still active, just so you know. If you ever want to check it, you can just Google it. It's out there. We're still under the national emergency, which gives you some additional flexibilities. Next slide. And here those are. So you need to be aware of those, and we'll talk more about them in a minute because they will give you that additional flexibility we talked about. Now, what will happen is if you end up spending, let's say you transfer more than 25% of your work study to SEOG so you can spend it in the summer, which is like what we do at GTCC, and I haven't gotten that far in my phys app, just so you know, I haven't finished my phys app either. But you'll probably get an error saying you've exceeded the 25%. That's okay. There's a section at the end when you validate your FAFSA that will allow you to put some comments in, and you can just put a comment in there that due to the national emergency, you've exceeded the 25% transfer limit. And then you're good to go. It's totally fine to do that. Next slide. So for those of you, I'm going to show you two examples here. If you are not a Title III eligible institution, you do have to make a 25% match from institutional dollars to the federal dollars. And you know you are a Title III eligible institution because they generally notify us, I think it's January or February. The feds will send you a notice whether or not you've been judged to be a Title III eligible institution. Just know that even if they say you are not a Title III eligible institution, but you think you should be, there is an appeal process, and they do explain what that process is. I know I had to do that one year, and I sent them a whole bunch of data from our institutional research people, and honestly, it was 10 minutes. They had sent back a response saying, okay, you're Title III eligible institution again. It's the fastest thing the feds have ever done, so I was amazed. So don't think that that's a final answer. You do have an appeal process, but If you are a Title III eligible institution, then you don't have to make the 25% match. And so you need to calculate how much available dollars you have when you're starting off your year to figure out how much to award. So I've done the calculation for you here for those who don't have to make a match. You would take your authorization and divide it by 1.05 to see how much you can spend for students. And I'm giving you an example then of how that math works out. This is foolproof. It's worked for me for a very long time, so you can utilize that to figure out how much you have money to spend each year. Next slide. And for those of you who do have to make a match, the calculation is different. So you need to be careful to use this one instead. Obviously, you will have more money to spend on students than in my last example, but that's because you're matching money from your institutional funds to do it. And you'll see here that you basically find out what, in my example, 100,000 in authorization is 80% of what figure. And that's the figure that you can spend on students. And then I showed below then the math that makes that work. So I will leave you to study that at your leisure. Next slide. So some more COVID considerations, national emergency. There is a section in the SEOG area, section F, where you need to report how much money you spent under the emergency SEOG permissions that you were given. Just as a reminder, with COVID in the original CARE Act, there was a permission to let us use some of our SEOG money, an unlimited portion, for emergency SEOGs, which means you can spend it outside the normal hierarchy, which for most of us, since we don't get enough campus-based funds, is limited to students with 0 EFCs. This allows you to go outside of that, but you really do need to try to track that because of this PhysApp question. You're going to be asked about how much you ended up spending in an emergency situation. So at my school, and we talked about this last year when I did this presentation, we had created a separate award code for this, FSEOE. And if you have done something like this too, in order to better track your emergency SEOG funds, just be sure that you add FSEOE to the FFAP setup screen so that it will pull that data as part of your PhysApp. The FFAP, although we're not covering this here today, is the first screen you're going to set up each year when you get ready to run your PhysApp, because it tells the system what award codes to pull on. So make sure you have all of them on that screen. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a link to the FA setup guide and to other references that will explain how to use PhysApp screens in Colleague. Next screen, please. So work study. Okay, so most of the guidance for SEOG is pretty much the same for work study. You can, and I mentioned it before, you can count your June payroll paid in July as part of your regular. And to, just as a reminder, make sure you update that CWS earnings field on AIDE before you run your final grid on the PhysApp, which is the eligible campus-based recipients grid, which is used, you do that using the PRDR screen. Next screen, next slide. Some other things to remember from COVID, due to the national emergency, that 7% community service requirement and the tutoring requirements have been waived or suspended. And that's now at least through the 22-23 year. And I suspect it'll probably be through the 23-24 year, because it says in their wording that it expires at the end of the award year that begins after the date on which the federally declared national emergency is rescinded. So since that hasn't happened yet, that will, if in the earliest it will be during this year, I suspect this will also be suspended for 23-24. Also on work study, you also have to identify those students who may have been affected and been paid under disaster permissions. Disaster affected students is the way they refer to them on the PhysApp. We did a lot of this during the first year of the pandemic, where we paid students work study money even though they weren't working. And that's, of course, because we weren't on campus. I don't know if there's any schools still doing that, but if you are, this is where you need to report how many students and how much was spent doing that, paying students who were not on campus working. Next screen. So when you get ready to run the program summary, which is again the eligible recipient grid of campus-based recipients, you want to use another query. A simple one to run is just to run your FMGT reports for SEOG, both SEOGs if you have 2 award codes, and work study. Just pull out the duplicates and remove the zeros, and you create a save list. So that's an easy way to do it, but you also may have some queries that you use, and that's totally fine too, obviously. Just again, make sure you're accurate here, otherwise you are not going to balance at the bottom. So it's important that you use a good query so that you get good figures. One of the little quirky things about Colleague that they've never fixed is that it will give out exact dollars and cents in expenditures for SEOG and work study, which is fine, but the Phys app wants whole dollars. So you end up having to round up and round down and round up and round down on various lines in order to get it all to balance at the very bottom. So just be aware that you're going to have to do a little fiddling there, either rounding up a dollar or down to make it all balance nicely. And again, less than full-time students and auto zero EFC students will be on your report, and you would utilize that information to fill out those sections of the program summary. Next screen. So at this point, we're going to open up for some questions and answers. Actually, on the next couple of slides, I have some common questions we're going to go over, but then we're going to open it up more generally for you guys if you have questions. Can we go to the next screen? And we talked a little bit about this. How do we handle checks that have not been cashed and will not expire before the Phys apps do? So when you submit your Phys app at the end of September, that's actually not the end. You will have an opportunity to make any corrections to your Phys app on or before December 15th. And so if you do have some changes that like voiding uncashed checks, that's your opportunity to get that information submitted correctly is on your December 15th Phys app update. If you don't have any changes between the end of September and December 15th, then there's nothing you need to do. It's only if you do have adjustments to the amounts that should you plan to submit something in December. And again, for more information, see Volume 4, Chapter 4, if you end up having to make changes after December 15th, because it gets a little harder to do that, but it is still doable. Next screen. Are we allowed to carry forward more than 10% of work study in SEOG for 22-23? No, you're not. That was a special permission that was given during the national emergency, but that one actually was rescinded. It was not permitted to continue forward, but keep in mind, you can still transfer up to 100% of your work study to SEOG, because let's be honest, work study sometimes is the hardest thing to spend, especially if you hire a bunch of people and then they quit on you. Then you're stuck with a pot of money at the end, and then what do you do, right? So at least you have the flexibility to transfer to SEOG and spend it like we do at GTCC. We spend it on summer students. Next screen. Are we exempt from the underuse penalty? No, you're not. Only that first year, I believe it was, for during the CARE Act, during the COVID, where we were exempted from that without looking for a special waiver. So if you have underspent your money and you have more money on hand than the 10% money you can transfer forward of work study, and if it's going to exceed 10% of your total allocation, then the feds are going to lower your 23-24 amount by whatever you didn't spend. So if it's under 10% that you didn't spend, that's okay. They're not going to do anything. But if it's over 10%, like if you have just a lot of money left over, you're in danger of now losing that money on a future award for the 23-24 year. Unless you apply for a waiver, and you should be able to apply for a waiver if you haven't already done so. I think it was due in August, actually. But double check that because you don't want to lose any money. Next screen. Okay, so this is really where the question section is. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Hi, everybody. I see some highs in the chat. Hey, any questions? You may not, you may be busy doing your Phys app while I'm talking, and that's okay too. 10 days is not a lot of time. You need to get that thing completed. All right, well, if you think of something, go ahead and throw it in the chat. In the meantime, let's go ahead and go to the next screens because I know we're running a little bit long. Just some reporting and reminders. Again, be sure to report your Pell Grants, but do make sure that those are balanced first. You want to make sure you have accurate information there. But just know that those amounts may change. And again, that's why you have the December 15th extension, if you will, to make any adjustments to your Phys app. I often have to make one in December because of the change in Pell. We have some late checks that don't get voided. Coordinate with your business office to reconcile your G5 activity and your work study earnings. Funds drawn down from G5 should not exceed reported expenditures on the Phys app. Otherwise, you're going to be required to return those funds. So that's why it's so important to balance. It's important to balance this time of year, but it's really important to balance every month if at all possible. It'll make your life easier when Phys app time comes around. Just make a note about the deadline for making ACA changes. You know, you might end up making changes later, but it may not change your ACA, which is your administrative cost allowance. The 5% were allotted by the feds to administer this program. So again, try not to draw out those changes too long because you may end up suffering your ACA eligibility. Next screen. And just some more, again, just some general reminders. Don't forget to validate. That's an option when you do put your FAFSA information on COD. Just remember, you go to COD now and log in there and click on the link to the campus-based system in the bottom left-hand corner menu to enter your Phys app data. And the last step is to validate that data. And that's where it'll throw errors that you either need to fix or explain. Remember about the rounding up and rounding down, reconcile often. We've said that repeatedly. And do thank your folks that you work with, including your business office, for helping you get this Phys app taken care of each year. Next screen. And this is where you can get either additional help from the feds or where to send your Phys app information. Now, remember, when you're done with your Phys app, the last step is you're going to print out a signature page for your president. So you're going to need to get them to do that for you. When you send it, if you get it out before September 30th, you could just put it in the standard mail. If you're running late, you have an overnight option. So, especially if you're waiting on your president to do something. I know how that goes. They're busy, busy people. Next screen. And here's those references I mentioned earlier, some resources for you. Brandy's and Andrea's FA annual setup guide has some really good information in there about Phys app and the screens that I have mentioned and peppered throughout. This necessarily wasn't a colleague session that I was doing today. This was more of a general Phys app session. So that's why we didn't like pull up screens and all that kind of stuff, because their guide really does a good job of that. There's additional Phys app training. There's updated Phys app training, I should say, on the FSA training website for the 21-22 year. So you can check that out. Go to FSA Partners for links to instructions and the reference guide. And then there was an electronic announcement on August 1, which had links to all this information and the reminder about the September 30th deadline. Next screen. Okay, so I'm done with the Phys app section, and it looks like maybe we did get one question here in the, I got a couple in the chat here. Let me back up here, make sure I didn't miss any. Question we got, if we didn't have SEOG money to award, can we still transfer work study to SEOG? If you did not have an SEOG allocation, gosh, that's a good question. That's a good question. Chad, I don't know the answer to that. That might be where you want to call that 1-800 number, that toll-free number with the feds, and ask them that question. I'd love to know the answer to that, though. Thank you for that question. And then at the bottom, looks like Allison had a question. Do you use the unduplicated headcount save list for EAAP, then run a save list for transmitted aid? You can totally do that. You can use the unduplicated headcount because that would include all students who were enrolled at least 1 credit hour, right? The only thing that I would caution you about, because I'm not quite sure how it would act, is that citizenship question. So just be sure to check that out first. And then run a save list for transmittal aid for SEOG and work study. That one should work out just fine using that list for the PRDR section for that screen. I think that would work okay. I would just be careful about your unduplicated headcount save list for EAAP. I think the citizenship thing might be something you have to consider. There's no other questions. I'm going to turn this back to our folks in the system office to finish us up for the day. And thank you for listening to me for the last half hour.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So much good information, as you can see from the comments in the chat. I would like to ask if Chad does reach out to the department, if he would share the response with me. I will make sure that I get that response out to the financial aid community, because it may be something that would come up for future, and we can add this to our frequently asked questions. So good question, Chad. Just going to give you that assignment to follow up with us. Would like to, I know we've gone over a little bit, but I do just want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for all that you do every day. Nothing goes unnoticed. I know it may seem like from time to time that you're just spinning your wheels, but everything is for a reason, and you are you're valuable. Can't tell you thank you enough. I do want to thank the presenters today, Dr. Wanda White, and also Arlena Ratliff and Lisa Kortoff. Thank you so much for that FISAP information. Dr. Kelly, thank you for the words of appreciation, and I'm going to continue to say those words of wisdom that you shared with us as well. A special thank you to the review team. A lot of what goes on, you all, I don't even know the half of it myself that they do behind the scenes to make everything as seamless as possible for us. A lot of things they do at the last minute. They're given bits of information, but they can make a whole mountain out of it. So special thank you to the review team. This concludes our first fall 2022 financial aid community meeting. We will get to you those Golden Leaf deadlines for submitting spreadsheets. We have found that spreadsheets are most effective. We do want you to continue to use the setup practices that you have that are in the colleague setup guide, but and you can also continue to use the data dashboard. But for reporting purposes, we will continue to send spreadsheets to the Golden Leaf Foundation. Thank you again for all that you do. Enjoy your day and the rest of your week. This concludes our meeting for the day.